weddings are a nice occasion unless you're paying for them, of course, and then it's really not that fun always. But no, they are. They're wonderful. And especially at that moment when the I do is said and wedding vows have been sealed and exchanged. And I think we have to all agree that there is, for that very moment, when I do is said, there's a lot of significance to that thought. I do only backs up a whole other force of ideas and concepts that go with marriage and that we talk about in God's Word and try to discuss. There's a lot of things we might do in life that really matter. Obeying the gospel really matters, and getting married really matters. And these things have in their nature something that is such a commitment. There was an article a few years ago in the Reader's Digest, and it talked about 5 myths that can wreck marriage. Some of them are good, and some of them probably weren't that important to our discussion at hand. But the principal point about it is that what you believe about marriage can wreck a marriage. And I thought that was interesting. What we believe about marriage can wreck a marriage if we believe the wrong things. And some marriages have gotten ruined because both partners believe something that wasn't even true about marriage. Sometimes that happens because one partner believed wrong things about it. But regardless, ignorance doesn't help the marriage relationship. If you believe in a wrong idea, it can wreck a marriage. If you believe in God-inspired truths, it can help build happiness in that marriage. That, and what I'm going to have to say tonight, I do believe is a two-way street. What I mean by that is you need more than one person believing this in that marriage to make this the success that it ought to be. You need 2 individuals working this direction and that have a trust in God that these are the courses that we have to follow. When we think about what's said in I do, it really makes a difference whether you see I do as kind of a thought that's based solely on human considerations, or whether you think I do is all about being rooted in God's law. Because when we think about marriage, is that just a social contract that men have developed along the way that just kind of evolved? In other words, is that all marriage is? Kind of like somebody sits down and writes out a contract in a business deal. Is that just what marriage is, just a contract? Is it nothing more, as some people proclaim it in this day and time, than a piece of paper? There are a lot of people going the live together route, and what they're saying about it is, what difference does it matter whether I have a certificate that says I'm married or not? After all, if you commit to somebody, aren't you just as committed whether you've got the papers for it or not? So in some people's mind, marriage is really no more than a piece of paper. Some, it's just a convenient arrangement. There are people today that are claiming marriage, getting marriage out of the desire that it's just a situation that makes our tax bracket better or whatever, and they think from that perspective. And there's some people, by the way, breaking marriages that are doing it because they don't think the benefits will be as good if they're married. When we think about all these kind of things, we have to come back to a question, and that is, what is marriage and how do we regard it? And how do we think about this? Because marriage has a history in the Bible, and I understand that if people don't believe the Bible, or if they're not convinced that that's the answer to their problems, then that'll mean nothing to them. But I don't hardly think I'm talking to people this evening that don't believe the Bible. And if we're going to believe the Bible, and if Christians are going to say that that's what they trust and that's what they go by, then the first thing we need to know about marriage is it may be a piece of paper to a certain degree, and it may be like a contract, but its heart is rooted back in the Garden of Eden when God first designed it. And that's what we need to know. And I won't go back to Genesis and quote it, but what I'll do, I want to show you that Jesus is being asked questions about marriage and really more about divorce and remarriage and things like that. But when he dealt with this and the Pharisees came, and I think it probably was pretty much a setup anyway, try to get him to say something controversial. But Jesus, in answer to their questions, really, if you want to know the truth, he didn't directly answer their questions at all. He talked about what God designed in the beginning. I say he didn't answer their questions. He didn't answer it in a direct way. But what he said was, have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female? And then he said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let not men separate. Okay, think about that for a minute. I just want to get across to you, and that packs in, a lot of things to think about in regard to marriage. But one of the things it brings forth to us is that when Jesus wanted to talk about marriage, where did he go? He went back to the foundation of marriage. He went back to what it was in the beginning, what God designed back there as he placed man in the Garden of Eden. And when we think about marriage and what it's all about, then the first thing we start with, and the thing I always try to emphasize in any marriage ceremony, and that is that marriage is God's idea, and that it is God that does the joining together. And that while we can sit around and talk from a human perspective about, putting away and all of that, that we have to stop and consider what God's point of view on the subject is. And I'm afraid that there's a whole lot of people, they're thinking all of this from the standpoint of what the law of the land permits and does not permit. Well, that's irrelevant in the sight of God. I mean, we should respect and obey the law, but we have to respect and obey God first and foremost than anything that he's had to say on the subject. So when we think and enter into marriage, and I do, and make a commitment, I guess it's going to matter a lot whether we run that marriage based on the idea that, a lot of people get married, a lot of people have these different, emotions and feelings, and a lot of people settle these problems a lot of different ways, and I just go with however things are done in the world today. Or do we go back and say, you know what, I want my marriage to be based and rooted in God's wisdom and God's way? That's the choice we have to make about marriage. And when we're talking about the I do, it makes a difference whether you see an I do as a kind of a temporary arrangement or a lifetime contract. It's not going to be the nature of this lesson to deal with the exceptions in marriage, and there is an exception presented by Jesus in some of the very contexts we were dealing with a while ago. I understand that, and I'm not eliminating the fact that there is a cause for putting away that the Bible speaks of. But anything you go into, if you go into it prepared to fail, you stand a substantial chance of failing. If you're going to approach it with a casual attitude that says, I can get out of this if it doesn't go my way, then that's probably what's going to happen. I think the better view is what the Bible presents, and that is, this is a contract that God sees for all practical purposes as a lifetime contract. I do should never mean I might. Just depends. I do has to mean I will. And if that's not the way we're going to approach it, I don't think we're respecting God's wisdom. In Malachi chapter 2, the prophet is dealing at that time, and God is speaking through him about a problem that had happened among the Jews. And it was the Jews that returned back from captivity and really had been there a while by that time. And God is enumerating his complaints against those people. As he comes down to it, this is what he says. This is the second thing you do. You cover the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping and crying. So he does not regard the offering anymore, nor receive it with goodwill from your hands. And yet you say, for what reason? He said, you come and you cry and you plead with the Lord, but the Lord doesn't accept what you're offering. Now, that's a strange thing. People are emotional, and they're coming to the Lord, and they're offering things to the Lord, and yet God doesn't receive that offering from them. And then the people said, why? God, why won't you receive our offering? Why won't you bless us? Why won't you hear our prayer in that regard? And the text says, because the Lord has been witness between you and the wife of your youth, with whom you have dealt treacherously. Yet she's your companion and your wife by covenant. Therefore take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously with the wife of his youth. Well, clearly we're dealing with the situation where they have put away mates, and these men, especially he's dealing with there, have set aside their Jewish brides and set aside the contract that they had made with them, the covenant that they'd made at marriage. And they'd married the daughter of a foreign god, the text elsewhere indicates. And he said, you dealt treacherously with the wife of your youth. Now go back again. Why is God so upset that he will not listen to their prayers and accept any of their offerings? He said, because you have acted in a way towards your wives that's ungodly. You dealt treacherously with her, and he says, she was your companion, is your companion, and your wife by covenant. You made the covenant with her. She is your lifelong companion that you've had, and yet you have dealt so treacherously with her as to put her away in favor, of another woman. You have dealt with her in that way, and God says that is a treacherous way to deal. The Lord God of Israel says that he hates divorce, for it covers one's garments with violence. It's an interesting statement, isn't it? First off, that God despises this type of situation. And then he says, you cover yourself with something that's immoral, ungodly, even, I think he speaks of violence, not because maybe somebody's been abusive, but because they've been, as he said earlier, treacherous. They have dealt treacherously with their wives. Therefore, take heed to your spirit that you do not deal treacherously. I think what you see in the Jewish mind at that time was, well, I got tired of this wife. I wanted something else. We grew apart, so I wanted something else. We didn't get along as well anymore, so I wanted something else. And so he says, you've dealt treacherously. You've acted like she's not your covenant wife. You've acted like she who's been the wife of your youth all this time now is to be cast aside because she doesn't. I tell you what it strikes me as, it's like the mentality. I mean, there's nothing wrong with this, but it's like a tired of my old car mentality. This car, it's getting a little older, it's giving trouble. I'm ready to trade it in on something new. And, there's not any problem with that if you're talking about a car, but you're not talking about a car here, you're talking about a wife. You're talking about a mate. If your attitude is, that I'm no longer satisfied with them, so I move on to something new, our attitude's ungodly. And he said our dealings are treacherous. And I think all of that goes back to how they envisioned their marriage in the first place. When they said, I do, they meant if it suits me down the road. My feelings have changed, in other words, so I move on to something else. When we say I do, it makes a difference whether you see it as based purely on physical attraction or it's because you see in them a character trait or character traits that you appreciate. And having said that, it's not that I'm down on, physical attraction or don't, appreciate the fact that we all found somebody, that we thought was beautiful and were beautiful to us and that we're happy with them that way. But remember that scripture we said about this morning, that two qualities that attract are charm and beauty. And he warns in that passage, even though it's not wrong to have nice looks and it's not wrong to be charming, but he's just saying be careful because those can be vain. People can be charming and it's a pretense sometimes. People can put on airs and they, in other words, charm, a lot of that is, taking on over you, being interested in you and all of that kind of thing. He said, beware, that can be deceptive. Somebody could use that on you and yet they don't have that attitude that we talked about this morning of wanting that good lifelong commitment, a loving relationship and somebody that does good for one another all the days of their life. Charm is a deceptive quality, and beauty is a nice thing to have, but he says the truth about it is it's fleeting. It doesn't go on indefinitely. But we can all appreciate the woman that fears the Lord. And I think, not to beat that passage over your heads all over again, but I do think we see in that somebody could be pretty, or for the men, somebody could be handsome, but that doesn't mean they're good. They may have an attractive personality, a charming personality, but that doesn't mean they have strong morals. And it can lead us down a wrong road, and they can affect us a wrong way. A preacher once told a story about a young lady from a congregation, and she had called to ask if he would be willing to perform their wedding ceremony. You get that a lot through the years. And so he began asking her a few questions, and he asked her, said, and this lady was herself a Christian. She said, the preacher said, what is he, what is he religiously? What does he believe and everything? And her answer to that was, well, I really don't know. We haven't even talked about that yet. And you got to stop and ask a question. In other words, you haven't even discussed those kind of things in your life. You haven't even talked about that. In other words, you're ready to get married, but you haven't even discussed how you'll live your lives. Will you live them together or apart, or how's that going to work? That deserves to be discussed, you'd think. A lot of things can affect us, and that's talking about religion, but now we're talking more definitely about Christian character. I wonder sometimes, has somebody looked at the idea when they're going into marriage, what kind of a person am I marrying? Not just have they swept me off my feet, not just are they attractive, not just are they somebody that, I just really admire and appreciate because of the person that they are, but are they really godly, and am I seeing them the right way? Am I looking at them the right way? You can build a nice, beautiful house with wood that's about to rot. You can build it and you can cover it up and make it look real nice, but the truth about it is that house is destined to fall apart. Somebody is going to try to build a life with character that's rotten and corrupt. It's going to ask for trouble. We have to be careful about that. We have to be sure that we're basing our concept of marriage on good reasoning, even though I know a lot of times reasoning doesn't come very definitely into it like it should. But we have to think from that standpoint. It says in Proverbs 12, verse 3, a man will not be established by wickedness. And I know that's one of those generic little statements about wickedness in Proverbs, but what it really is saying, the word establish suggests the idea of stability. And what that basically means is wicked character, a wicked person will never bring stability to a home. So what we're basically talking about is if I marry somebody that may be charming or beautiful or handsome or, just really have that air about them, but basically in their heart of hearts, they are a wicked person. They don't know God, and they don't know God's ways, and don't appreciate the biblical way of living. If that's what we're getting into, then he says we will not be established through wickedness. There will not be stability. That it'll be an unstable situation. And, what I feel bad about is that there are, and there may be some in this assembly, I don't know everybody's case for sure, but there are women who married, and then maybe men too, but there are women who married believing in the character of somebody, believing they were right in character, and found out dreadfully so that it wasn't that way. And it came back to really hurt and haunt them. And it's just horrifically sad. And that it wasn't necessarily their fault. It just simply, they didn't realize that that person's character on the inside was not what they were portraying it to be on the outside. But I believe that they would testify to you that the wickedness they found out about brought instability and unpleasantness to their households. Speaking to young people that are going to get married someday, the person you marry, that person's going to influence you the most the rest of your life. Hopefully you'll get to influence them the rest of your life. But, you know, a big question is, what's going to happen down the road, in other words? Well, think about Solomon, for instance, and what he did. We know he had multiple wives, but it was marriage that turned Solomon's heart away after other gods. His heart was not perfect before God, as was the heart of his father David. David made mistakes, but Solomon gradually allowed these multiple marriages to enter in, and we all know he married women that did not share anything with the Jewish lifestyle and commitment to God. They didn't care about any of that. In time, his heart was turned away. He was king, he was wise, he was strong, but in time it affected his thinking. And I'd like to approach, and I'd like young people to approach marriage with the idea, can this person help me to be a stable Christian, or are they going to work against that? Will they help me to serve and glorify God and be strong in the faith, or will they lead me away? I'm going to tell you something. There are some people that I do kind of sealed their eternal destiny, because it, like Solomon, took them away from where they needed to be. And in time, they left the Lord. And in time, they left this life in an unsaved condition or a lost condition. When we talk about I do, it matters whether we see it, and this is a young people growing up business, is it just a chance to get out of the house of your parents, or is it an opportunity to become a home? I do say this to young ladies, and I say it to even the very young that old enough to understand a little bit of what I'm talking about. Sometimes as you get in your teenage years, same thing could happen to young men. As you get in those years, there begins to be a little tension between you and your parents, and that happens nearly in every home, and that's not too surprising. You love them, but you're feeling that sense of independence, and you're feeling like, I'd like to be out of this. And that's pulling on you. And so you see in marriage a chance to get out of that home. Not because you hate them, but because you want independence. That's an unfortunate reason to marry. And it may seem like a ticket to a different kind of life, but it may be different in ways you didn't ever think about. I do. It's never going to bring us freedom or independence from responsibility. If the problem is at home, they're making demands on my life and have expectations of me and are calling upon me to act a certain way and live a certain way, and married life to me represents independence from all of that, then you have to understand you're just trading problems. In other words, you're getting out of one bad situation into another, perhaps worse situation. Because once you say I do, you've accepted tremendous responsibilities, a whole new set of responsibilities. Because if you're a wife, if you're going to be a Christian wife, you're going to say, I'm willing to submit to this guy. I'm willing to obey and follow his lead. If you're a husband, you're saying, I will live my life unselfishly, and I will give honor to my wife. And I will, I'll look at her the right way, and I'll try to be an understanding person. You're taking on tremendous commitments right there. And all of those are wonderful, and they're exactly what marriage should be. But we ought not to enter into I do unless we really believe that. And are saying, I'm ready for that, and that's what I want to be. That's what I want to do. Those are responsibilities I want to take on. It says that I do means I'm ready to make a mature commitment. Go back to this passage, from Genesis. For this cause, a man shall leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Look at that carefully. And notice right there the word cleave. The Greek word cleave means to be glued together, to adhere, to be joined in such a way that you really can't hardly get apart. This is what God's looking at when He's looking at marriage. And that's why He said, we don't need to put asunder because this is what's been joined together. Well, this requires commitment on our part. And you see there, you're leaving father and mother, you're cleaving together. That's your home now. That's your relationship. The cleaving will require great maturity because you're saying, I'm grown up enough to leave father and mother and join and be this person's mate now. And they're who I'll deal with the rest of my days. Not that you won't love father and mother and deal with them in some ways, but this is your family now. This is your relationship now. Ecclesiastes 9 verse 9 underscores some of this about husbands and wives. The big point is when we're cleaving to each other is to enjoy, appreciate, and have a relationship that's enjoyable to begin with. Live joyfully with the wife whom you love all the days of your life. All the days of your vain life. You have to understand Ecclesiastes, that's why he said that. The life He's given to you under the sun, all the days, all of your days of vanity. For that is your portion in life and in the labor which you perform under the sun. He's saying there is so much to life that is vain, that's hard to understand why it's that way, that's disrupting to our hearts and minds. There is much about life that is empty and has in its nature just a dissatisfaction with the way that it is. But he says one of the things that all of us can do, if we will, is to be happy in our marriages. For husbands and wives to live joyfully with each other. And underscore the word joyfully. We got to live with each other if we're going to stay married, but live joyfully. To be appreciative of one another and what you've got, and don't be embittered towards one another, but thankful for what we have in that regard. I think, with the exception of a relationship with, of course, God, we have to stop and think about in our relationship with other people. In the end, our marriage relationship counts the most. It has to be that way. We have to think of it that way. I think other things in life have to have a secondary, lower priority than that. We're told again in Malachi 2:14, she's your companion. And you go back to Genesis, and that's exactly what God's showing us and designing for us in that regard. So that's a part of I do. And the I do makes a difference. Whether you see it as based just about a physical love relationship or it's founded on higher love. There is attraction and physical love, and that's a part of marriage, but how about the higher kind of love that must come into play if we're going to have a good marriage relationship? We understand marriage, first off, what it is. It's honorable among all. The bed undefiled, fornicators and adulterers, God will judge. And so we understand there are relationships that don't belong, that cannot be practiced, but within marriage that is appropriate, and that's all fine. But what we have to understand about it is that while we have our wives and husbands and wives are together, and that prevents sexual immorality because within the marriage relationship that's fine and good, and I don't want you to think that what we're saying is, well, that part doesn't matter at all. That's a part of marriage. But we're missing the point if that's what we think marriage is. I do, as you know, means I have to be willing to practice true love. And 1 Corinthians 13 is the kind of love we're talking about. So that's the definition of love. And practically that means in regard to your mate, you have to be patient and you have to endure problems and you have to endure everyday faults without, just throwing up your hands and giving up just because it hasn't gone the way you wanted it to go. It means the idea that you have to act in kindness. Now all I'm saying, I'm not quoting, I'm just simply pointing out that's what 1 Corinthians 13 says love is. It's acting kindly, it's using kind words, it's putting aside the put downs and the aggravated type words and trying to be kind with our actions and deeds and words. It means not being jealous of what each other has or gets to do or whatever. Not jealously coveting. Love doesn't envy. Love doesn't act jealously about all of this. That does not mean, by the way, that if your attitude is that you're flirtatious and you're trying to seek relationships with other people in a wrongful way, that your wife doesn't have a reason to be jealous or your husband doesn't have a reason to be jealous. Of course they do, because you're theirs. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about being jealous of the things that each other gets to do, or other things of life. We don't need to have that kind of attitude in a marriage relationship. And he talks about not being boastful or arrogant or full of sinful pride. That's my way. It's got to be all done my way. I can't ever humble myself and say, well, you know what? Today you get to go and do something. You get to have a little fun, or you get to enjoy yourself. I don't mind doing that, and I'll keep the kids for a change, or I'll do that. I'm not saying that has to go on all the time. I'm saying we can get real arrogant about a marriage relationship and act like basically in it, no, this is about me and what I want. No, we don't have Christ's attitude if that's the way it is. There's a time and a place for all of these things, but what we have to see is we can't become filled with a sinful type pride and arrogance that thinks, pretty much I'm here to be pleased, and that's what marriage means to me. Well, that's a pretty unfortunate way of looking at it. 1 Corinthians 13 talks about love doesn't behave in an inappropriate way. That's a general sense of it. It's just simply reminding us there are certain things that just absolutely inappropriate for Christian behavior. And if that's the case, then love doesn't act in a rude or inappropriate or improper way as we serve God. We have to quit trying to have our own selfish way or thinking we're always right about everything or things like that. We have to not let ourselves get so irritated and exasperated or angry all the time. We must control ourselves. That, again, is what 1 Corinthians 13 teaches about love. You remember now, 1 Corinthians 13 it isn't an exegesis on married love. It is love, period. So when we get over here into marriage, we see where it applies there. You must not sit around mentally and just constantly keeping track of all the things that have ever been done wrong to me by this person, all their bad things they've ever done to me. It's just not a very good habit day to day. We can have a better attitude than that. Love's defined in 1 Corinthians 13 is that, look, if what we're doing is wrong, then we all need to be sorry about it. And if what we're doing is right, then we all need to be glad about it. But love doesn't rejoice in doing evil things, or it doesn't rejoice when wrong is done. Love rejoices in truth and right and goodness and righteousness. And that's how it ought to be in our marriages. We have to be willing in that kind of love to cultivate a relationship that says, I'll bear with it. I'll endure, because there's going to be difficulties, there will be hard times. And I'll believe and hope always that God will let us get better and that we'll strive towards that end. I know it's real easy to stand up here to speak to people, some of you who are not married in a situation where your mate is part of the church or hearing all of this, so it's kind of one-sided probably to you, and I guess that's so. But still, what we're trying to do is respect God's Word and live our lives. The Bible always teaches the idea that we can't deal with everybody else out there in the world and make them line up to what we expect. But I think about what Paul said in Romans 12, as far as depends on you. In other words, as much as you can do about it, that we want to do the right thing and we want to have the right spirit about those I do's and what that meant back at the beginning. So those are just a few thoughts this evening. I'm concerned in a time like ours. I'm concerned about young people growing up and they're going to get married, and I'm concerned about those of us who've been married a long time and maybe our feelings and ways straying from what they ought to be. And I think it's time to remind ourselves of what I do meant. And I think also as we think about the world keeps trying to influence us certain directions, we have to kind of renew our spirits the right way and the right attitudes and make sure that we're not dealing treacherously with one another or acting in a wrong way, but that we're forever respecting God's plan for marriage. Just keep before you, the world's trying to move us a different direction, and God's trying to pull us in His direction, and we have to have the right spirit about things. So a lot of it's just common sense and good hearts that want to be what God wants us to be. That's most important of all. In just a moment, we'll sing a song to encourage us and be standing, but if I might plead with you at this moment, if you know that you're in a situation before God that's not right, if you believe in your heart and know with conviction that things are not as they should be, I'd like for you to look carefully at that. And if it's a very public thing, why not come and let us all pray together about it? If you, of course, need to obey the gospel, I'd love to see you take that action tonight. Come and be baptized into Christ. Let's stand and sing.